The presentation is going to be about 30 minutes, and then we'll leave the second half for questions. So I'll pass it over to Annika.
Great. Thanks so much, Hannah. I saw Maddie. I don't know if you wanted to say a foreword. I saw a raised hand.
All good. Sorry about that. I was making sure the video was being recorded.
Thanks. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I have been an employee with Garbage to Garden for just about 4 years. I've been very involved in this Boston program as well as our other municipal programs from the very outset. I've also been a curbside participant with Garbage to Garden for 13 years now. I'm from Cambridge originally, but I am based out of our Portland headquarters in Maine. So just briefly to introduce Garbage to Garden, we were founded by Tyler Frank in 2012 here in Portland, Maine. Really have just sort of grown organically from the curbside presence of those buckets for visibility. And the concept really started with a question of why isn't curbside composting available? Why aren't we able to just place another bin at the curb? And so it started from there. He set up a table at the Portland Local Art Walk, got his first 17 signups, and started a collection route with his used pickup truck and buckets he had purchased at Home Depot. So we've really sort of expanded dramatically over the years. We're in 12 communities in Maine. We expanded to Massachusetts in 2017 and started this program with Boston in 2022. So the program basics, really a popular program from the outset with just a single mailer that went out. The program signed up the first 10,000 spots in 2 weeks. We had a waiting list close to, I believe it was over 7,000 for much of that first year, and then expanded 10,000, currently servicing 25,000 households citywide. I think as Hannah mentioned, the eligibility is restricted to buildings with 6 units or fewer. We operate 7 routes daily. And this is trash day aligned really just to sort of improve that ease of remembering and convenience as well. So we can accept a wider range of items than a home compost, which I'll go into a little bit later on, just further reducing what has to go out with the trash. This program, as we'll dig into, has these 2 different processing methods for recycling those food scraps. We will also service your curbside bin where your trash is located, just with the caveat that if you have service in an alley or on a side street, letting us know, as we don't have that information beforehand. But that is available to folks with alley service as well. This is also really key to containerizing food to help reduce rodent populations in Boston. So there's just an example of the alleys. We do also now have 2 curbside containers available. So if you started up with that 12-gallon, we do now have a smaller 5-gallon. And that was really just in response to folks' complaints and concerns around size. Obviously, the 5-gallon is more easily brought inside if you don't have a lot of space outside. So that is an option available. So digging into the 2 different methods, anaerobic digestion has this output of clean energy as well as a dehydrated product digest state, whereas composting is really turning recycling foods into that nutrient-rich compost. Our primary partner up until now has been brought in, but I'll go into a little bit more about some of the other sites that we're exploring. So looking at composting first, it's a really sort of a managed process of decomposition. Decomposition will happen naturally and produces gases as that's happening. So by composting, we're really trying to create the most optimal conditions for that process to happen efficiently without greenhouse gases and facilitate that process. So because of the scale of composting, it's a similar need as home composting, where you have those sort of 4 primary ingredients, looking at your browns and greens or your nitrogen-rich foods or nitrogen rich sources like food scraps, as well as more carbon dense products like forestry byproducts. So wood chips, leaves, shavings, sort of that dry woody matter. The other two key ingredients are water and air. So sometimes you'll hear composting compared to like creating a recipe. You're trying to get that ideal ratio for that process to happen as efficiently as possible, and avoiding sort of the issues that go along with that. If you've composted at home, you might be familiar with sort of like odor issues that can arise. And primarily most of those issues come from a lack of oxygen. So composting is naturally an aerobic process that requires oxygen for that to happen efficiently. Because of the high temperatures reached by those piles, we are able to accept items that generally are recommended against including in a home compost. So like meat, bones, dairy, seafood, those can cause odor issues, attract rodents, but really the primary concern there is with pathogens and bacteria persisting in that soil after the composting process. So if you were to then apply a homemade compost with those items in, say, a vegetable garden and consume those vegetables, there are risks to getting sick. But certainly if you're studying that process and really overseeing the process well, you can avoid those. I also sort of like the analogy of comparing composting to building a house, because what you're really trying to do is create those optimal conditions to invite thermophiles, or these heat-loving bacteria, in to sort of do the work for you. So because of those bacteria, those piles are naturally reaching temperatures over 130 degrees, which are sustained over a prolonged period of time. The majority of the composting partners that we partner with use thermophilic or windrow composting. So this is an aerial shot from a few years ago from the site in Brockton. And you can sort of see like those are small shipping containers down there. It's really a massive scale. It's very land intensive. This next photo, I think, shows as well. Really takes up a lot of space for this process. And those piles typically are maintained, I believe by regulation, it's required to have 5 turns of those piles over a period of 15 degrees while they're in that cooking phase. There's then a secondary phase where those piles are moved out onto essentially a curing pad to allow those temperatures to come down naturally. This is another photo from the site in Brockton. Another partner that we've worked with for years for other projects is Brick Ends Farm, north of the city. We have recently started bringing food scraps from Boston there as well. So another method of composting that we do at our own site here in Maine is aerated static pile composting. The Brockton site has been developing this method, and I think that Brick Ends is also considering establishing this. It's a little bit more infrastructure intensive, but it's also a faster process. So you're able to cut down on the area, but needs a little bit more inputs. I think this next photo shows a little better. So essentially we have these 8 bunkers, those white pipes sort of peeking out, have holes in them and are pumping air from below that pile. Directly on top of those is a plenum layer of wood chips that help sort of distribute that air evenly. So this reduces the need to turn the pile at all while it's in that cooking phase. And then that pile is then capped with a finished layer of compost to help sort of seal that in. What isn't displayed in any of these images towards the back of the bunkers is sort of a drain area that collects runoff, which is called leachate. And that's sort of this condensation, liquid runoff that's then collected in a tank, which is used to sort of add the moisture back into the pile through a sprinkler system. So on those edges of the bunkers, we're able to turn on these sprinklers to bring down the temperatures if they're getting too high, but also maintain that proper moisture level. Here's just another view of that. And this is directly from our landing pad where all the food is sort of distributed when the trucks first arrive. Or in this case, this was a pumpkin cycle event that we had done. So the food scraps and pumpkins arrive. They are then fed into this red piece of equipment called a mixer, where it's sort of, let's see, I think I have up, this other view shows sort of creating a homogeneous, helps break up the food scraps a little to help sort of that process happen more quickly the smaller the pieces are. But it is also specifically for mixing. This is where the amendments are added. So manure, forestry byproduct, wood chips to sort of build that recipe before it gets distributed back into the bunkers. Once that cooking phase is done, so I mentioned it's a shorter timeline. Aerated static pile composting only requires by regulation 3 days in that cooking period. We're typically more on like a week rotation, moving product in and out of the bunkers. There then is that secondary phase of windrow, putting them into windrows for that curing phase. And that's typically more like a month long that it's sitting in that final stage. So that finished compost product goes back to our curbside participants. We're excited to make it available to residents this year in Boston for purchase. There are also a number of free community events. This is specifically about one coming up on April 27th in Jamaica Plain. We also donate compost to the community gardens and schools. There's a form that can be requested. And then the compost created by our composting partners also gets used directly on their farms and supports the local food system. So switching over to anaerobic digestion, if you look at the small map on the right, these are the 2 composting partners we're currently working with. It's something we continue to look to expand to sort of diversify those outlets. We've also been exploring the possibility of like a food transfer station to be able to more efficiently haul food scraps longer distances. As you can see, zoomed out on the map there, it's about a minimum hour on a good day to either of those sites. The Brockton site looks a little bit closer, but it's primarily driving through the city. So really just looking at the logistics where our drivers are, it usually makes more sense to try and prioritize brick ends. So on the map on the left, that little blue arrow is where the core facility is located. It's also where our team is based out of. So really just cuts down on the driving hours. Anytime we're going to the farms, you're adding 2 hours of driving time per vehicle. So anaerobic digestion, again, composting is an aerobic process. It requires oxygen. Anaerobic refers to the absence of oxygen. So if you think about food scraps ending up in a landfill, typically it's sealed in plastic bags, it's buried under layers of other inorganic materials. And so in that absence of oxygen is where you end up with these really mass productions of methane. According to Project Drawdown, the methane warming effect is up to 34 times stronger than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period, or up to 84 times more potent over a 20-year period. So through anaerobic digestion, we're creating a sealed environment so that we're able to capture those greenhouse gases and prevent them from causing the harmful greenhouse gas effect. Similarly, it's a process in which bacteria are helping to break down the food scraps. So anaerobic digestion can have various outputs of products, but primarily it's these 2, the biogas, whether that goes to electricity or a natural gas sort of application. And then that digestate, which is sort of that solid byproduct resulting at the end of the process. So harnessing organic waste as an energy resource has a long history, excuse me. Just before the turn of the 20th century, sewage gas was illuminating street lamps in Exeter, England. Today in Exeter, Maine, there's a digester that primarily creates that animal bedding product. It's a cow farm and they use it directly on site. But if we look specifically at Boston and the core facility and those outputs, the methane there is generated into clean energy that's put directly back onto the grid as electricity. While this doesn't directly benefit Boston, it is benefiting the greater Boston region. And then that end product, digestate, is turned into like a dehydrated fertilizer product. I believe it's called Earthlife. It's an EPA certified product that's sold and distributed by Casella as an agricultural benefit. And so what that process looks like is our trucks are delivering food to the core facility. There it's fed through a depackager. So this is really an ideal outlet for like grocery store product that's still in its packaging, wasn't able to be donated and is past its usable date. Their equipment can physically remove those plastics and contaminations to end up just with the organic product. That is then ground up, the solids, into what's called engineered bioslurry, essentially like a thick liquid product that's then able to be pumped into vehicles and transported to the GLSD facility, the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District. So from there in the image here, you can see the digesters in the top left corner there. Looking at the inside, the way this sort of liquid is processed, that sort of central column there allows for a slower speed to allow solids to settle down to the bottom of the tank. Meanwhile, those gases are rising to the top where they're captured because it's in this sealed container. That sort of spinning piece down at the bottom helps removes those solids. And then the skimmer at the top helps remove any, remaining plastics or items that might be left in there. This diagram, I won't go into it sort of too much in depth, but that sort of top half there is sort of waste coming in through the wastewater district. So sewage and those items, if you're putting food scraps down a food waste disposal, they'll go through that process, but don't have the sort of same benefit. They're going through chemical treatments. If you think about food scraps, like uneaten food has unspent energy. When we digest food, we're sort of absorbing those nutrients and removing that from that end product. But that is sort of the key ingredient to really creating this high output of biogas. So down at the truck here, that's sort of the incorporation of food scraps and bioslurry. And this co-digestion process really sort of maximizes that biogas specifically because of those nutrients and that energy contained in those food scraps. So looking at the two sort of side by side, obviously both of them have a smaller footprint than incineration. Unlike a landfill, you're able to capture those gases, preventing the harmful greenhouse gas effects, but then also ending up with these benefits of biogas and that digestate fertilizer product. Looking at composting specifically, nutrient-rich compost obviously has great applications for agriculture. Unlike a synthetic or chemical-based fertilizer, those tend to give a short-term boost to the plants or the crops being grown, but really don't have any sort of long-term benefit to the soil or the long-term health of the environment. By adding compost, we're increasing organic matter in the soil, which helps foster rich, microbiome in the soil, which nurtures long-term health in the plants. Healthy soil is also effective as a carbon sink. It's actively pulling atmospheric carbon down out of the atmosphere, so that added sort of benefit of reducing greenhouse gases. It also equips our environment to be more resilient in the face of drought. So by increasing the biodiversity and the soil structure there, the ground's more able to hold and filter groundwater. So plants and the environment are more resilient against drought conditions. And then obviously it's necessary to grow healthy food. So in addition to benefiting our local air and water quality. The disadvantages, as I mentioned, it's extremely land intensive. So when we first launched this contract, the city had hired a consultant to explore possible sites within close proximity that could be used for composting or a sort of food transfer type site. But obviously, there is greater value in affordable housing and higher priority items within direct proximity to the city. Obviously, the disadvantage are the road miles. If we have 8 trucks out a day and each of them are spending 2 hours driving just for the sake of composting, it would be really advantageous for us to be able to, reduce that to a single truck hauling larger quantities. So that's definitely something we continue to explore to increase the amount being diverted for composting. There's also trace amounts of greenhouse gases. Certainly a mismanaged composting pile that is ending up in anaerobic conditions will be creating those greenhouse gases if it's not being turned properly or maintained at proper moisture levels. So for anaerobic digestion, obviously it's space efficient. These tanks fit within a building. They're in direct proximity right in Charlestown, reducing those road miles. One of the keys to launching this program, we knew at this scale that we would require massive capacity. A lot of the farms that we work with, while they're bigger in contrast to small community farms, there are still concerns just with contamination at those sites, as well as just how much that they can really accept on a daily basis. That digestate does have the agricultural benefits of nurturing the soil on larger scale farms. Obviously, the production of clean energy and supporting, removing away from fossil fuels for heat and electricity. The disadvantages for anaerobic digestion, the energy isn't being directly used by Boston, but it's close proximity. Another result of the depackaging equipment is that certified compostables ultimately get removed as trash. So they end up landfilled, whereas if they do go to an industrial composting site, they are able to be processed along and not sorted out. And so then just briefly, sort of to close, it is Food Waste Prevention Week. So just a couple numbers as to why it really matters what we as individuals do. 1/3 of the food produced in the US goes to waste. This happens at all phases of the food production cycle. So it can happen in the field, at harvest, packaging, in restaurants, or in retailers, but a full 40% of food goes to waste in the home. So the way that we decide to sort or dispose of our food scraps really has the potential to have a massive impact by diverting those from other outlets. In states like Massachusetts with food waste bans, these are initiatives to sort of help incentivize reducing food waste, specifically looking at commercial businesses or restaurants, encouraging a source reduction, so purchasing more mindfully, and sort of preventing ending up with too much on hand. Certainly, if there are food items that won't be used in time, prioritizing feeding hungry people, so donating to food banks. The next priority would be feeding animals. Oftentimes when we do our pumpkin collections, we put a word to local farms if there's anyone with pigs or goats. There's an added value to feeding those animals rather than going straight to the compost pile. Industrial uses, so considering the anaerobic digestion outlet, as well as we do provide separate collection for small amounts of oil, and those get recycled through a company here in Maine called Maine Biofuels that recycles that into bioheat. So that, again, is a higher value than prioritizing composting. Obviously, composting is preferable to landfilling or waste to incineration, which with food scraps, because of the high moisture content, really is not an efficient process. So as we like to say, waste isn't waste until it's wasted. Obviously, when folks get involved and start sorting their food scraps, it's not that they're producing more food waste. We find that ultimately folks become more mindful of just how much ends up in their compost bin through that active sorting and really seeing how much is going out each week. So we've got a great customer service team. If there are any questions, their contact information is available on our website, whether it's service related or just sort of like bigger picture questions about where it's going. They'll often forward those on to me. That's my email right there as well. And then just a plug, we are actively increasing our street team effort in Boston. It's something that we tried recently in Medford and found it's a really effective way at reaching folks that maybe have less awareness about the program or maybe have some lingering questions that are just sort of preventing them from taking the action to get involved. So we are currently hiring, I believe, up to 10 part-time individuals to join this effort, going in groups and really just raising awareness, being able to tackle folks' questions head on. That's listed on our Indeed page if anyone's interested or knows anybody. And then I'll hand this over to Maddie, but the city does also have a Boston Compost Certification program for Boston residents only. And that registration hasn't opened yet, but an opportunity to visit Brick and Farm actually for a portion of that and learn more about that composting process. So Maddie, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Annika. I appreciate that. So like Annika mentioned, we have the Boston Compost Certification Program each year. Each year we hold 2 courses of it. The first one will be on May 10th and May 17th. It's a 2-parter. And then the second session will be June 7th and June 14th. We're still figuring out the exact timing of that. So once that's all finalized, the registration links will be available on this webpage. And I'll drop that link in the chat as well. But this is a free program for Boston residents. It's a really great hands-on educational opportunity to learn about composting on like a soil 101 level, a small scale composting, large scale composting, including a field trip this year to Brick and Farms, which we're really excited about, and just kind of understanding how composting relates to climate change in general.